Hello, my name's Susie Olson, and I'm the site manager for the Northern Michigan District of Michigan Rehabilitation Services, or MRS. MRS is part of the Employment and Training Division of the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, or LEO. Welcome to our first Friday event called Return to Learn, Accommodations in Post-Secondary Education. Why are we focusing on post-secondary accommodations? You may have heard about Michigan's 60 by 30 goal. By 2030, 60% of working age Michiganders will have a certificate or college degree. The jobs requiring skilled employees today and in the future demand greater education and training than ever before. In fact, 70% of Michigan jobs will require at least some post-secondary education. Higher education leads to a higher income and increased job opportunities and employment advancement. People with post-secondary education tend to have higher job satisfaction. The state of Michigan has multiple programs to help Michiganders achieve a post-secondary credential. Michigan Reconnect offers free in-district tuition at any of Michigan's public community colleges to all Michigan residents who are 25 or older and do not have a college degree. Last week, a bipartisan deal was reached by the Michigan legislature that created the Michigan Achievement Scholarship. MRS is focused on helping our customers, individuals with disabilities, achieve post-secondary training leading to a credential. Our session today focuses on the supports that are available to individuals with disabilities to foster success in post-secondary training. So before we get started, I'd like to do a couple of housekeeping items. First, comments are muted, so please type your questions and comments in the chat. We'll have plenty of time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions that you may have. We will be doing Q&A at the end of the presentation. And finally, closed captioning is available by clicking on the closed captioning button located at the bottom of your screen. So I'd like to introduce my special guests today and subject matter experts. Leanne Baumler, Coordinator of Disability Supports and Student Conduct Specialist at Northwestern Michigan College, and Sean Ott, Disability Services Coordinator and Academic and Athletic Advisor with Kirtland Community College, to talk with us about accommodations in post-secondary education.
Thanks, Susie. Thank you for having us today. Sean, I hope you'll chime in whenever you feel like I've gone astray with my comments and you have things to add. I really appreciate you being here. So what we plan to talk with you today about are how it works. How do accommodations work in colleges? What kind of documentation might be required? Some common accommodations, and then we'll have time for questions. So Sean and I both come from a background of being familiar with a lot of colleges in Michigan and how things work. So we're not here to talk to you specifically only about our institutions, but give you some general information about how the accommodation process works at most colleges. Really, I think we can say all colleges have the certain beginning process as the same, which is the student has to request the accommodations from the office that offers those at that institution. Now, it might be called something different. Here, it's called Disability Support Office. Other colleges might call it Student Access. Could be housed under the Diversity Office or all kinds of different titles. So it'd be the job of the student or their support team to get on the website of the college they plan to attend and find out what the name of that office is called and what their process is like. Sean, do you have something to add on that topic?
Nope, that was perfect. Thank you.
Sure. So for a lot of colleges, it works like that. You can call the office, you can get online. There might be some big universities where you never meet face-to-face with the intake person. You might just fill out your application online, upload your documentation, tell them what accommodations you'd like to have, and then send that in electronically and they create your letter. Some places are going to have you come in and meet face-to-face and go over everything individually, some once a year. Some places will only have you request your accommodations one time, the whole time you're at the university. Your letter will be good the whole time you're there. Others want to see you every semester to check in and see how things are going. Some other variations could be that the accommodation letter is given to your teachers by the Disability Support Office. Or like here at Northwestern Michigan College, we email the letter to the student. So they're in control of who sees that information and can distribute it appropriately. One thing that I think we all have in common is that your information is very important to us as far as confidentiality goes. So if you send us documentation about your list of disabilities, that usually stays housed within the Disability Support Office. Your accommodation letter that does get sent to your teachers doesn't have that information on there. Whatever you want to share as the student to make that teacher be a better teacher to you, you can do that. Send them an email, go to their office hours and explain to them how you best learn and how they might best help you. But we as disability support professionals are not going to share that information with them on a general basis. So let's move to the next slide. So there are a lot of differences between high school and college accommodations. Really, the big difference is access versus success. So what that means is that at the secondary level, which is the K-12 system, high school level, they follow different laws and guidelines than we do at the post-secondary or college level. They have a law in the high school level called the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that is really focused on the success of the student. They have a lot more flexibility with what types of accommodations that they can provide to the students. So then over in the college, once you are, not even once you're graduated, I almost said once you're graduated, but even if you're still in high school taking college classes, then our laws and guidelines apply to you. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504 of that Rehab Act of 1973 apply with the standards that the college would require. Now we'll move on to the next slide. So here's just a couple of examples of differences between high school and college level accommodations. So in high school, a lot of students are given extra time to turn in assignments. So at the college level, basically everything is due on the due date, just like everybody else, with a few exceptions. I know here, if a student has a condition that comes and goes, like MS or migraine, something that hits them hard without any warning, we might be able to write an accommodation of the occasional due date extension. But for the most part, the student has to get all their resources in place so that they can hand in the work on time along with everybody else. Really does, I can see Sean agreeing that it doesn't do students a great service when the semester is only 15 or 16 weeks, you're automatically getting a week extension on every assignment. That sounds good, but it really is detrimental to the success of the student because the whole class is moving on and our student is still stuck on, assignment 3 when everyone else is on assignment 5. Do you find the same thing going on, Sean?
Yeah, I typically will discuss that exact scenario with students and how it really isn't a great idea because you don't want it to spiral into a situation where they are not able to finish their classes.
Right. And we would never just say no to a student. We have what we call an interactive process. So we're going to meet with you and talk with you, or if it's all electronic, someone might be emailing you back and forth about it. But we would like to offer other resources instead of just saying, no, you can't have that, even though you just had it for the last 4 years of high school. So we might refer you to the tutoring office or make sure you know about whatever counselors are available. If you have a counselor on the outside, see them and talk to them about the issue on why handing in things on time is not working out for you. So there could be other resources that could be available to the student to help them get their stuff done on time. So the next one, often in high school, we see the instructor's going to repeat or rephrase things during class. Well, if only Sean and I had that kind of control over the instructors, that'd be great. But we don't have that kind of control over them. So the students are going to have to ask for clarification. They might hang around after class and talk to the instructor or go to their office hours and be much more proactive and responsible for their own learning that way. Study guides. Well, if this teacher has study guides, they have study guides. If they don't, we can't make them create a study guide for the student. But there again, tutoring. all colleges have tutoring available? Not necessarily, but a lot of them do. So if they do, then go there, sign up for that, because that could be the same thing. You could ask your tutor, help me create a study guide for this. Access to notes during tests, that's usually only if it's available to everyone else in the class. And some instructors do say you can write a 3x5 card of notes. Great, then so can the students that we work with. But for us to be able to approve that as an accommodation is super rare. I never like to say it never happens, because everything's on a case-by-case basis, wouldn't you say, Sean?
Absolutely.
Next one on our list there would be adjusted class schedule or a shortened day. Well, most students can choose their own schedule. You know your strengths and weaknesses. Just because the first advisor you talk to says that you need to take a full load, because that's what students do. Well, maybe you know with your lifestyle and your learning style, you would not be as successful taking a full load. Then you should schedule yourself accordingly. Now, there are some programs that have requirements for a certain number of credits, and that is something that could be accommodated on a case-by-case basis. We don't just accommodate classroom things. With the right kind of documentation and report from the student, the institution might be able to also accommodate or adjust their policies and procedures. So modifying tests and homework assignments, if only we could do that. We would make so many people happy if we could do that. But I always have to tell students, no, if everyone's assigned a 10-page paper, you're going to have to do a 10-page paper. But you might use more resources. You might go to a reading and writing center. You might talk to the librarians more than the person sitting next to you in the classroom. You have to do the same work. We can't shorten assignments. We can't shorten tests. Like occasionally a student will come to me and say, in high school, I only had to answer every other question on a test. We can't do accommodations like that, but we can give you longer time on your tests so that you can answer all the questions, same as your peers. So getting started with this process, when the time comes for you to get yourself into a higher education setting, the student absolutely must register with the Disability Support Office. No matter what it's called at the college you want to go to, you have to be the one. Now, can someone else make that appointment for you, like a parent or other support person? Depends. I know here where I work, they will check and make sure that you have certain releases on file before they'll even let anyone but the student make the appointment. So it's really great if you as the student can be really self-sufficient and get in there and advocate for yourself and make that initial appointment. Dual enrolled or early college students, your high school plan that you have right now, same time you're going to college, does not apply to your college classes. And there's some logical things involved with that. If you stop and think about it, I don't even know you're here. If you haven't registered with my office, I don't know you're here. So I can't provide you the accommodations because I don't know you're here. Does it work the same with you guys over there at Kirtland, Sean?
It does. Yep.
Yep. We just want to make sure that everybody knows that. I'd say it's the #1 question that I get, and confusion all around. If the student walks up to their college teacher and shows them their IEP or 504 from high school, the instructor sometimes doesn't know what to do with that. So they'll ask me, or the student will say, well, I've been here for 4 weeks and I haven't had any of my accommodations. And my answer is, who are you again? I don't know you if you haven't come to apply for the accommodations. So that interactive process that Sean and I were talking about, that's where the student can sit with us or email or get on Zoom and talk to us about how that thing they've been diagnosed with is affecting them as an individual. In the old days, it used to be more like a menu you choose from, like, oh, I have ADD. I can choose from these accommodations. Or, oh, I have PTSD. Here's the things that I qualify for. It doesn't work like that anymore, most places. But it's the interactive process where we find out what's the barrier for that individual, because it's not always the same. Sean, I bet you've had the same experience. I've interviewed students that have dyslexia. And in my head, before I knew much about it, I would say, oh, I bet you want all your books as audiobooks. Oh, no, one student said, that drives me crazy. I don't want anything to do with audiobooks, even though they have dyslexia. to me, I thought, well, they're just going to want to hear it read out loud. That's going to remove that barrier, but it's not always true. So you want to talk to the student and find out how it's affecting them.
I agree.
And then documentation of the disability, that will be required. So I know a lot of colleges, including where I work, we need to collect something from a treating professional. So that can be just what it is. That can be a social worker, that can be your family doctor, that can be any treating professional who can verify your condition. So ours, we like it to be no more than 3 years old. But am I going to put it through the shredder or rip it up if it's 3.5 years old? No, but that's just the general guideline. Some students will come and say, well, in kindergarten, I was diagnosed with something, and then that's carried them through. They've never been reassessed. They've never been updated. And then I will say, all right, let's see if we can get you in for some kind of reevaluation and try to get some updated documentation. It's sort of good for the student too, to have a current view of what's going on with them. Do you know of other documentation rules, Sean, at other colleges?
Not necessarily. I mean, I believe that most colleges kind of follow the same rule of we need to have that documentation of the disability on file. And even though the disability might be identified through IEPs when they come, that's, for us at least, that's not considered documentation of their disability, because that's not typically done by a professional who's licensed or authorized to diagnose. So we would still require something more current.
That's a really good point. I think we probably both see documentation come in from the high school students that sometimes says that Jeremy shows a weakness in reading or struggles with math. So they had services in high school because they struggled with math, but struggling with something isn't a disability necessarily. So then we have to talk about that with the student and either send them to tutoring and other resources, or encourage them to get some kind of testing to see if it is rising to the point of being considered a disability, which is another point, that just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean it's a disability. So like anxiety, sure, if I'm in the nursing program and I know that one bad move and I'm out of the program after I've already given all this time and money, yeah, I have anxiety, but is it a disability? Is the only time you feel anxious when you're in this college setting? Or do you have like generalized anxiety, and on the outside, when you're stuck in traffic or you're in a long grocery line, do you also feel anxious? So that's part of the interactive process that we were talking about, where we have to try to drill down into what is the barrier and is it considered a disability? Does it really like stop you in your tracks and make it very difficult for you to proceed? If it does, then that's where accommodations could be appropriate. So reiterating my favorite point, that the documentation does not follow a student after high school. We have so many students come here that say their high school counselor told them that it did. At least that's what we hear. That might not be what was said in the office, but it's that ghost person. They told me this would follow me through college. It just doesn't. If the high school counselor or even the MRS professional sends the documentation to a different office or even my office, that doesn't start the process. We have to hear from the student. So there is a little bit more detail about documentation, no more than 3 years old, clearly stated diagnosis, not that shows a weakness in reading. That's not clearly stating a diagnosis. Student name and the credentials of the certifying individual. It's all important stuff. So this is the fun part, common accommodations. Do you have any common ones at Kirtland that you'd like to go over, Sean?
This is pretty much the same list that we have here at Kirtland.
I think it applies to almost every college, especially the first two. So extended time on tests and quizzes, and testing in a reduced distraction location. Those have to go hand in hand. Like I tell the students, if I were to give you time and a half on tests and quizzes, and you stayed in the classroom, think about how much worse that would be for you, because everyone else is getting up and leaving the classroom, and there you are with your extra half an hour or 45 minutes. So usually who proctors that test is going to vary from institution to institution. You might be taking the test in your instructor's office, or you might be in an empty classroom next door, or there could be a testing center where you would go and log in, and then a test proctor would just keep everything on the up and up while you get your accommodated test. Note-taking assistants, that's really evolved over the years. I've been in this position here since 2010, and it's really changed how we provide this service. So note-taking assistance doesn't necessarily anymore mean a peer note taker is going to share their notes with you. It could mean that, but we had found over the years that sometimes those notes were not very good, and it was doing a disservice to the student. Sean's nodding, yes. So now we might offer, for someone who qualifies for note-taking assistance, we might offer permission to record the lecture, or the lecture video recorded and loaded on Moodle or whatever learning management system that they use. Use of a smart pen. Have you ever used a smart pen? You should look those up if you haven't. They're pretty cool. So some colleges have those kinds of pieces of equipment that we can loan to students for the semester. Books in alternate format. So that's worded purposely that way. It's not necessarily an audio book. It might be a digital book where you could pair that up with a text-to-speech program if you have a print disability. And preferential seating. Some students say, well, it's college. Do I really need that? Well, maybe not, but maybe yes. So why not throw it in your letter? I think that people who would benefit from preferential seating could be someone who's utilizing a sign language interpreter. They might want to sit in a particular spot. It's not up to us as the disability support professionals to say, student will sit in the front row, because that might be like way too close and not the best place to sit. So we just worded as preferential seating. Could benefit someone with PTSD. Maybe they want to be in the back of the room, so they don't know no one's behind them, or maybe they want to be by the door, so they just feel like they can dash out at any minute. So yes, Sean.
Sorry, Leanne, I was just going to chime in with this one. For preferential seating, we had a student one time that didn't necessarily need to sit in any particular location in the room, but needed a certain type of a chair for the student's comfort. And so we just made sure that that chair was always available for that particular student. So that's how we use preferential seating in that instance.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We can accommodate furniture. We can accommodate all kinds of different things. I write one that seems to really help with students who have PTSD or other symptoms that could hit them quickly, like maybe Crohn's disease, for example, and it's just permission to quietly leave the room if their symptoms arise. That can be anything. Symptoms could be anything. So then the instructor will know, oh, this student's dashing out in a hurry. I'm not going to say, hey, where are you going? Because I remember I had that accommodation letter from the disability office. So we'll just let that happen. Now, the student is also always told they're still responsible for any information they miss while they're gone. So you can't just leave and not come back and say, what did I miss? So find a classmate or hit your recorder if you have permission to record the lectures. You could do that to find out what you missed while you were gone. But it's going to be all individually based. Sometimes I tell students, it could be something we haven't even thought of yet. When Sean and I attend the Michigan AHEAD meetings, so AHEAD is the Association on Higher Education and Disabilities. We're both members of the Michigan chapter. And so we hear from colleagues all around the state once a month, and through a very active listserv, we hear about ideas and troubleshooting, making things like going to your engineering office and say, hey, can we use your 3D printer to make this thing that this student with a disability needs for access? So got to think out of the box. The student really needs to be able to express as clearly as they can what's going on, so we can start the wheels in motion in our heads to figure out how we might be able to accommodate that. Something that we didn't touch on yet, might have been implied, but all of these things have to be connected back to the symptoms of the disability. We can't accommodate preferences. Like, I'm a visual learner, I'm an auditory learner. That's more of a preference. You've got to figure out how to make this work for you, because I can't make the teacher make a pictogram for you because you're a visual learner. But we've got tutoring that might be able to help you with that. And let's see what else we can do, because maybe you have another condition that qualifies you for accommodations. We also have to try to weed out not accommodating like gaps in your learning, like going back to that note-taking assistance accommodation. Do you qualify for that accommodation because of your disability, or because you didn't learn how to take good notes in high school, and now here you are in college saying, oh my gosh, I didn't even bother, and now here I am, you know, in a lecture class where the teacher talks pretty fast, I don't know how to pick out the important stuff. That is more a gap in your learning. So we wouldn't kick you to the curb, but Sean and I would probably refer you to somebody in our institution who could help catch up your skills on note taking. So we have to make sure that we're weeding those kinds of requests out. What's a preference and what is a need, really, to remove a barrier. One that I didn't put on the list, but has been coming up a lot lately, is students asking for assignment due dates to not apply to them, that they were able to just hand everything in at the end of the semester or the year in high school. And obviously we can't do that. That is more of maybe the symptom of the disability might be causing them to procrastinate too much. Then that's what we have to deal with, because you will have due dates applied to you. Unfortunately, we all do. So that's a big one that's been coming up a lot lately that we just can't do much about. Everybody has to be able to hold up their end of the bargain as a college student. And part of that is having due dates applied to you. Sean, what about when you get requests for absence, like flexibility with attendance policies?
That seems to be a big one that comes up on the listserv a lot. And I think it is all on an individual basis. And rather than what we've done here in the past is, rather than just making a blanket statement that the student has, you know, an accommodation for extended absences, we'll work with the instructor to establish a plan for, in the situation where the student has to be absent because of their particular situation, we'll work on a plan on how to make sure that that student is still successful in the class. So again, it's on an individual basis, but I try not to encourage that, because when a student misses a lot of class, they're missing a lot of material.
Yeah, they sure do. And there's all kinds of studies we can quote if we get pushback on it. That, I mean, I think there's one out there that says you miss one class, and on the average, your grade for that class will go down by 1 point. So from a 3 point to a 2.5, because you've missed a class. So we don't encourage it. Occasionally it can happen. That's another thing we have to get at, is why are you asking us for that accommodation? Sometimes it's totally legitimate. Like the people we mentioned earlier that have things that come up, hit them at the last minute. Or I've written it for students that have to see a specialist that's rarely available. A lot of our veteran students have to see their VA person, and it might be during class. If it isn't, we just say to people, why don't you just not schedule something during your class time? Well, if it's a specialist who's up in a rural community like Traverse City, or anywhere in northern Michigan, you might have to see them when they're there. So yeah, we can write something that might say, on rare occasions, the student might request from you, the instructor, the ability to miss an extra class with no punishment. We always look at the syllabus, see what's already in there. A lot of teachers don't even have anything about absences. They know that they're adults and they can miss what they miss, and that's that. Because even if you have the accommodation of missing a class for disability related reasons, you still have to find out what you missed. It's not like you get points for being there that day. You might not get any taken off, but you still have to find out what you missed. So it's not like a get out of jail free card when it comes to being absent. So we like students to be here. Sometimes when you're doing the interactive process, student will start sharing about how, well, I'm a single mom and I have to work full time and I'm taking all these classes and my car's broken down, so I can't get to class always. Well, that's not disability related. So we can refer them to other things that can help with that. But I wouldn't write an accommodation for absences for someone who says that they're just so busy. I relate. I can understand it and empathize with someone who's that busy they can't make all their commitments, but then maybe you need to lighten your load or reach out to friends and family, all that stuff that we already know about. But sometimes when you're in the heat of it as a student, it's hard to find a way out. So we do like to help with referrals to other agencies that might be able to help.
Absolutely.
So now is the time where Susie's going to read your questions. If you are hesitating and haven't put your question in the chat yet, now's the time to do that, because you have us to answer your questions. And if we don't know, we know how to refer to other places, don't we, Sean?
Sure do.
There aren't any questions right now, but I have one. So you mentioned the smart pen. And I was wondering if there's any other types of assistive technology, maybe things that are newer that you've seen that have been effective for students.
Go ahead, Sean, you can start. I'll chime in.
So a lot of times students come prepared. What I find anyways, we haven't had to purchase a lot of assistive equipment, because what we find, or what I find, is that students come prepared a lot of times. For instance, if they come with an alternative format textbook, they're already utilizing software programs that allow them the ability to do that. They just have to, get that approved through us sometimes. Or they're allowed to record a lecture, but maybe they've already been doing it on their phone and their instructor didn't even know. So we haven't really had to purchase any extra alternative resources, but I know, with some of the larger universities, I know that they probably have access to some other stuff, and I'm just not all that familiar with it yet. So for me, it's kind of like, if I'm encountered with that, then I'm going to do the research and try to figure out what I can do to help the student the best.
I can add one piece of equipment that's super popular this semester, especially. I have to buy new ones and put them in the system, are the C Reader pen. You heard about those? C-Reader. Look it up on YouTube. It is great for students who like to hear printed material read out loud. So not every book is available as an ebook that you could pair up with a text-to-speech program. So this C Reader pen, it looks like a big fat marker kind of, but you scan it over each sentence and it reads it out loud in a computer-y kind of voice, but it's still really helpful. Has a built-in dictionary. It will also translate in different languages. So it's really comprehensive solution for people who need to have a paper book, but also want to hear it read out loud. They have an exam version that I keep down in our testing center that doesn't have the dictionary, so that it's a secure solution for students who need to hear their printed test read out loud with that down in the testing center. Otherwise, what we do is we buy equipment like digital voice recorders and that C Reader pen by the gross. I buy a lot of those. And those are the two biggies right now. And then we barcode them through our library system. So NMC's library has them in their system. I keep them so I can charge them and clean old notes off of the smart pens between semesters. But then when a student qualifies for one, I take it over to the library, and then they can use the library system to borrow it for the whole semester. In the old days, when I first got this job, nobody was keeping track of who had what equipment. And some of the stuff is a couple $100. So this ended up to be a great partnership with the library. Just barcode it, let the student take it. They get reminders of due dates and all that kind of good stuff. So that's some of the equipment. But I agree with what Sean was saying. Students really do need to come prepared, because we don't have a lot of experts. Like with JAWS, I don't have anybody on this campus that can teach you how to use JAWS. That's a very complicated program. And if you're coming here saying, I need it, then we're going to have to refer you to an agency or an individual who can teach you how to use it. So come prepared with your technology and we'll help you with some stuff that maybe you hadn't thought of.
Thank you. A couple of questions have come in on the chat. How many students are usually in a classroom?
Well, I think ours like max out at around 30.
For ours, it depends on the program. Like our automotive program, our max is 20, but our regular class sizes, like our general education classes, those might be 26. It really just depends on, I think it depends on the college.
Agreed.
Thank you. Is remote or distance learning ever offered as an accommodation? For example, an in-person course records their sessions and shares the recording with the student.
Well, Sean, I see you're waiting for me to answer. I would say that would rarely, if ever, be a legitimate accommodation, but not impossible. It would just all depend on the documentation and the reason that the student needs it, because there's usually another solution other than doing that. It's a whole different process to create an online class. Everything has to be different. And there's course creators, course developers that go through that whole process with an instructor. So to think that the student's getting a similar experience just by having a video of a class not meant to be online sent to them, it's not really the best answer, even though it sounds kind of good.
And again, I think it has to do with the resources available at each individual college. So at Kirtland, we have many programs that are primarily online already anyways. But if we have a program that is primarily an in-person program, we utilize Canvas, which is an online learning management system, and all of our instructors use it, whether it's an in-person class or not. And many of the instructors will record their lectures and load them into the course. So if a student needs to miss a course or miss a day of the course, then the video would be there so they have access to what they might have missed during class. But I agree with Leanne, where there are just some programs that they need that hands-on practical experience, and you're just not going to get the same experience in the online format. And so there isn't the ability to be able to do that.
Thank you. How frequently do you allow a service animal as an accommodation? Are there animals that are not allowed?
Well, a service animal is not an accommodation. A legitimate service animal does not, their handler does not have to register with a disability support office. It would be a dog or a miniature horse, but hopefully just a dog. Those are the only two animals that would be service animals. Any of the vests and the badges and all of those things that you see do not make it a service animal. Those are usually not even legitimate. Anybody can buy them and slap them on their animal. So we would go through the two questions that the ADA allows someone to ask the handler of a service dog. Is this an animal that's been specifically trained in regards to provide you a service in regards to your disability? If the answer is no, then we ask that dog to be removed from campus. If the answer is yes, we say, what is that service it's been trained to provide? And then the student will answer. It might say so many different things, right? Oh, it's going to alert me when my blood sugar gets too low, or it's going to pick up an item that I dropped because I can't bend over and pick that up. So those are the only two questions we ask. If the animal is misbehaved in some way or a nuisance, then we're allowed to ask the animal to be removed, just not the student. They're welcome to come back.
Thank you. I'll give a last call for questions. I don't see any more in the Q&A, but if anybody had another question, please feel free to enter that in. We're gonna one last moment. I just wanted to say thank you very much to Leanne and Sean for joining us today and talking about accommodations post-secondary education. Really appreciate your expertise.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting us.
Happy to help.
All right, seeing no further questions, thank you everyone for joining us, and happy first Friday.